Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. J.W. Jason Oker back with us, and he is an Edgar-winning, award-winning travel writer. He's a horror novelist and a blogger. His previous nonfiction books included Poland, The New England Grimpendium, The New York Grimpendium, A Season with the Witch, and the New York Times reviewed Cursed Objects. He's the creator of the blog and podcast Otis, which stands for Odd Things I've Seen. That's his website as well. And his latest book is The United States of Cryptids. JW, you've been busy.
I have. Thanks for having me on, George.
Good to have you back to the program. What's new with you?
These days, it's monsters in small towns. That's mostly what I'm into right now.
How did you get interested in that?
So I've always liked cryptids from a child. Probably the same story as most people that like cryptids, where you pick up a John Keel book or one of those kinds of books, and you see pictures of the Mothman or Loch Ness Monster, and then you just like monsters for the rest of your life. And they're a different kind of monster, right? You grow up like seeing Dracula and Frankenstein in movies, but these cryptids, you know, the books tell us there's a possibility they exist, and it just kind of fires your imagination as a child and sticks with you throughout your life usually.
And when you hear cryptids, I mean, we're talking about all kinds of monsters and strange creatures, aren't we?
Yeah. I think back in the day, in the early days of cryptozoology, there was like much more constrained, you know, Bigfoot and lake monsters. But these days encompasses folklore monsters and aliens and mythological creatures. So it's a big kind of smorgasbord these days.
How many do you think might be real?
That's a good question. I always stick to anything in the water could be real because who knows what's going on down there. And that, you know, every single state has a lake monster, and every ocean is packed with monsters. So there could be a good bit. Plus, you know anything in a forest. So, and, you know, the country and world is covered in those. So maybe a good bit. How
difficult or how easy was it for you to write the United States of Cryptids?
Oh, it was easy because it was a blast. So the angle on cryptid, on the United States cryptids, there's a lot of cryptid encyclopedias out there, but the angle we wanted to take on it was more, you know, not debunking or not trying to prove or not just trying to list. We wanted to celebrate them, so we really focused on making this almost a travel guide where we would go to all the towns and all the places that would celebrate these creatures, like festivals and statues and theming them and making them the mascot of their town, and that turned it into like a really, really fun project.
Some of these cryptids are pretty darn scary, aren't they?
I think most of them are. For some reason, we like monsters. I guess most animals are also scary if we think we were so used to like lions and elephants and, you know, those kinds of things. But really, if we just came across them for the first time in our lives, they'd probably be pretty scary.
Are these creatures relegated to certain regions of the country?
Not totally. Most of, I would say, are in the rural areas because obviously you need some geography and some habitat for the creatures. But there are also kind of a subspecies or subgroup of urban cryptids as well.
Let's talk about the Jersey Devil. What have we researched on that thing?
So the Jersey Devil is interesting because that one starts not with a sighting per se. You know, a lot of cryptids start with, you know, glowing eyes in the dark on the back roads. For the Jersey Devil, it starts with a myth, almost a folk tale where Mother Leeds is her name, back in the colonial era, had a 13th child that was cursed and became a hoofed, winged, long-faced creature that flew off in the pine barrens of New Jersey, and these days is still seen every once in a while.
Do most of these cryptids, have they hurt anybody?
That's a great question. So in my experience, in my research, I should say, 99.999% of cryptids have never hurt a single person. Like all the stories in the newspapers and all the stories in the books almost always just end with, you know, hunting parties chasing them down and then the cryptids just disappearing into the night. But there is the rare occasion where, for instance, the folk Bigfoot, the folk monster of Arkansas, That one attacked a person, according to the stories. Or the snallygaster of Western Maryland is supposed to have grabbed somebody and taken them up to the hill and feasted on their guts. So there's one or two that are definitely in the stories hurt somebody, but most of them, they're just trying not to be bothered.
JW, what would the definition of a cryptid be?
I would say a cryptid is a creature that has some evidence but is not acknowledged by mainstream science.
We'll talk in a moment about your other book, Cursed Objects, which came out 3 years ago. That was a great book. New York Times reviewed that one. They loved it, didn't they?
Yeah, and they did. That was also a fun one. A little bit more dangerous for me, but a fun one.
Now, how did you begin to track some of these monsters all over the country?
So because of my history with my website that you mentioned, oddthingsi'veseen.com, I've been constantly crossing the country looking for weird stuff. And cryptids and cryptid towns always fell in that category. So I had some familiarity with the subject matter, and then it was just a matter of digging into the newspaper. So a lot of times, probably the first time in my nonfiction life, 90% of my research was just in newspapers, because newspapers, would track these sightings day by day or week by week. Back in the golden era of cryptids is probably the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there's just giant records of them. And then, of course, once I knew about the creatures, I'd go just try to search around to see if there's any commemoration of them, a plaque, a festival, a statue, a gift shop, a museum. And then I would, go see those places.
Let's talk about different regions of the country and tell us what you think is out that way. Let's start with the Northeast.
So the Northeast is great because it's the oldest area of the country, of the United States at least. And probably my favorite thing in the Northeast is going to be the Gloucester sea serpent. So the Gloucester sea serpent is, a typical sea monster, just a long serpent in the water, but it is the most documented cryptid of all time, I think, at least in the United States. It was off the coast of Cape Ann in Gloucester for like 2 years. Scientists studied it. The sailors attacked it. Tourists came and camped out and watched it splash around. And we have quite a long record of this creature. And today, if you go to Gloucester and you go past the famous fisherman statue, you'll see a 8-foot-tall statue of a sea monster right there by the Historical Society. So it's kind of really cool that not only they have the story, but they also have this giant statue commemorating it.
Is it like the Loch Ness Monster?
It's not brontosaurian or plesiosaurian. It's more like a snake.
Or a big eel?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. How about the southern area of the country? What do we have there?
Oh, the South is rife with cryptids for some reason. So they have everything from skunk apes, which is Florida's version of Bigfoot, pretty similar but very smelly. That's kind of their calling card.
Yeah.
To things like they have. I'm trying to check my notes before I lie about my regions. But at the South and the Midwest are the two areas I found probably the most creatures. So the South has, they have a wide variety, right? So they have the lizard man in South Carolina, which is a
Mothman comes from that region too, right?
Yes. West Virginia is full of monsters. The Mothman, the Flatwoods creature, is another West Virginia monster. Virginia has woodburgers, which is another kind of Bigfoot. The town of Norfolk, or city, I should say, Norfolk's a city in Virginia.
Yeah.
They're known for their mermaids. They've, for some reason, adopted the symbol of the mermaid, and they now have mermaids all over that city. So
now that's a monster I wouldn't mind chasing. A mermaid.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, what about the Midwest?
So the Midwest, to me, is probably has the most creatures, or most variety of creatures, and I always point at Wisconsin as having the best, because Wisconsin has the hodag, which is a panther-sized creature with spikes on its back and big tooth. It's a lumberjack lore. And the town of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, celebrates this thing. It's like their favorite thing in the world. It's their mascot. There's statues. There's merchandise. If you go to their .gov website, where usually you'd go to pay bills or check out demographics and population, it's basically a hodag fan site. They've got fan clubs that you can sign up for and video games you can play that are hodag themed. The hodags are my favorite. Mount Horeb up there is obsessed with trolls. The Beast of Bray Road, that's a werewolf creature, which is all over in Elkhorn, and also next door in Michigan, they also have the Dogmen. So there's a big werewolf population up there in the Midwest. So a lot of stuff.
How about the West, in addition to Bigfoot, obviously?
Yeah, the West is Bigfoot land for sure, all the whole Pacific Northwest. To the point that it almost shoulders out everything else. But I was able to find things like the Kodiak dinosaur, which is Alaska. So they have as big as Alaska is, it makes sense that their major cryptid would be the size of a giant water dinosaur. They have aliens, right? Roswell's out there in the West. They're big on those. Sasquatch is a favorite of mine, right? So that's literally a Sasquatch-like creature with wings. That's Washington State near Mount St. Helens. They've got some skinwalkers. We know about those. Slide rock bolters, which is these giant land whales that hook on the mountains and slide down them. So they've got a few besides Bigfoot, but still, Bigfoot's the king. Pretty much not just of the West, but probably the entire country, honestly.
In addition to your travels, JW, did you come across witnesses who were just lost it when they saw these creatures?
So not firsthand. So most of the people I talked to were researchers and experts, but in all of the newspaper accounts, there are just tons of witnesses, and most of the evidence, probably 90% of all evidence for cryptids, is eyewitness accounts. And generally, the stories are, people seeing something in the night, glowing eyes, and then just kind of having their reality upturned, right? Because they're seeing something that they didn't believe previously. Now they see a giant hairy thing or a giant scaly thing or a multi-legged thing that doesn't quite fit any animal they've ever seen, and now they have to live with that for the rest of their life.
Did you get any Thunderbird stories or large animals?
Yeah, the Thunderbirds, I did those up in the Dakotas. Obviously, those are based on Native American lore. There's quite a few kind of ancient rock carvings of them up there in the Dakotas, and some modern art as well. In Bismarck, there's a great statue of 4 giant Thunderbirds that was sculpted by the local First Nations technical college there. And then, of course, probably the most modern Thunderbird story happened in the 70s in Illinois when I think it was an 8-year-old child got attacked by 2 gigantic birds and almost lifted off, except his mom came out and beat them off.
She had a broom or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What about the lizard man?
Oh, he's a great one because, a lot of times a cryptid comes along and then everybody sees it everywhere. That's Bigfoot, right? It's been seen in all 50 states. But nobody has a lizard man except for South Carolina. And basically this story was pretty typical of most cryptid first encounters, where it's a teenager driving alone in the night and in the dark. In this case, he hits a flat. He goes up to change it, and this big, scaly, glowing-eyed creature attacks his car. And then from then on out, people started seeing scratched cars and attacks in the local swamp, and it became a legend. So now you go to the museum in Scapore, and it's history and all their textiles, and then a whole section dedicated to a 6-foot-tall, scaly creature with giant claws.
Jeez. And it seems like West Virginia, Ohio, and Wisconsin, Jason, do the best job in somewhat celebrating or promoting their monsters.
I totally agree. To the point that even a good example in Ohio is the peninsula python, which is literally it's an out of place species, and oops is what they call it, where a giant python, which is a real creature, we know that, for science acknowledges that, got loose or somehow it lived in the town of Peninsula for like an entire summer. And this was back in the 70s, so now every single year they have Peninsula Python Days, where they decorate their houses with pythons, just like, we would decorate with, streamers during the 4th of July or boughs of evergreens during Christmas. And they have parade with like giant serpent floats and stuff. So the Midwest, again, especially those 3 states you mentioned, are just the best at celebrating monsters.
Is your book, The United States of Cryptids, also like a travelogue?
It totally is. So besides having the stories of the creatures, which are all historical stories, there's my experiences going to these towns and experiencing the kind of the celebration of these creatures. And then in the back, we have a really good kind of index that tells you, more than 2 dozen festivals every year with all the dates, all the addresses and GPS coordinates you need to find the statues and to find the museums and to find the placards and the historical signs. So you could take this with you and read about the creatures and then kind of use it as a wayfinder. Have
you found that some people actually plan their vacations looking for these creatures?
Oh, totally. Either looking for the creatures or just celebrating them. The Mothman Festival in West Virginia, that's a town of 4,000 people, and it's a town you'd probably never go to ordinarily. But every September when they throw Mothman Days or Mothman Festival, it doubles in size. The population to like 10,000, and people are just there to not even to find the Mothman, really just to kind of party and dress up as him and celebrate this kind of weird story in West Virginia's history. But otherwise, yeah, there's definitely tours you can go on, especially with Bigfoot. There's a lot of kind of go out in the wilderness and camp and try to find footprints.
Well, with J.W. Oker, also known as Jason, his website, oddthingsiveseen.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. This book, The United States of Cryptids, where do people get it, J.W.?
Anywhere you get books, all bookstores, Amazon.com, anywhere you buy your favorite books, you can get it.
What is the Wampus cat from the South?
The Wampus cat is a giant cat, kind of like a panther, cheetah, anything like that. But it just happens, in most depictions of it, it just happens to have 6 legs instead of 4.
Jeez.
And for some reason, the big phenomenon around the Wampus cat, in my experience, is that there are a lot of high schools around the country that use it as a mascot. So they have statues, they have murals painted on the wall. Obviously, it's on their jerseys. And for some reason, a 6-legged giant cat became just known for, rallying school spirit across the country.
The Oklahoma octopus.
Yeah, that's a good one. So Oklahoma has a bunch of lakes. I think they're all man-made, but they're all freshwater. And science, so far as we know, acknowledges no freshwater octopus. There's no such thing as a freshwater octopus. And yet, despite that, there have been stories surrounding, I think, 3 lakes in particular, of, people getting dragged into the water and ending up with sucker-like indentations on their skin, and just in general, those lakes being very dangerous and kind of having a lot more victims than lakes should up there. So that's the Oklahoma octopus. It's just, again, lake monsters are cool because there's such a wide variety of them. It's not just all kind of like Loch Ness Monster, plesiosaurs. It's octopuses, it's giant catfish, it's giant worms. It's a nice little subset of cryptids.
In the Midwest, they have the Piasa bird out there in Alton, Illinois. Native American legend has it as a huge bird that one of their fighters had to battle, and it was an amazing story, the Piasa bird.
Yeah, and today you can go up there on the river there, and there's a giant mural of it on the side of this kind of limestone cliff face. It's been there in some form or fashion for hundreds of years. They've repainted it, redone it over the years, but it's always there, and it's a really cool kind of like thing to see.
Of all the creatures, JW, you researched for the United States of Cryptids, what would you say might be the strangest one?
That's always going to be, I think, the Fresno nightcrawler, which is, a couple of basically living legs. I walked across a lawn in Fresno, California one night, and that they took video of. So, I don't know, living legs always kind of freaks me out, and I think nothing kind of beats that as far as, like, what a weird creature could be. Your
foreword was written by a dear friend of ours, Lauren Coleman. How's he feeling now, JW?
He's doing good. I mean, he just opened up an adjunct library to his International Cryptozoology Museum up in Bangor, Maine, just around the corner from where Stephen King's house is. So he's still massively contributing to the field and opening stuff, and he's doing good.
Good. That's good. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's great. I've known Lauren for years just because, his museum's not too far away from where I live, so I'm always trying to get up there.
Back a couple of years ago, you wrote a book called Cursed Objects. Tell us how you came upon that.
So Cursed Objects, the idea was, there's certain cursed objects in the world that are famous. We all know, right? There's that have massive histories, both paranormal and historical. And I was tasked with trying to find, 50 of the most famous and writing about their stories and visiting them if I could and just being involved in that kind of cursed world.
Tell us more.
So some of the famous stuff. So what I found out was most of the famous cursed objects are either lost to time or they're in some of the most major museums in the country, in New York, in D.C., in London. Most of the cursed gems, I think 11 out of the top 12 cursed gems are inside museums. There's cursed mummies. So if you want to see a cursed object, you probably already have just by going to like the major museums of the world. And then the other side of that was I got involved a little bit in the business of cursed objects, where there's an entire trade of people not trading famous cursed objects, but trading kind of obscure cursed objects across eBay and the collectors who bring those into their own personal museums. So it was a wide variety of experiences I have, from myself purchasing a cursed object on eBay to going to the London Natural History Museum to see their kind of cursed gems.
What makes a cursed object cursed?
Yeah, so I really had to define that myself because it is really vague. So what I came up with is it's an object that has to instill harm and either some kind of misfortune, but do it serially. It has to be able to do hurt to more than one person. And then one of the most important points, because you could also describe, say, a handgun as an object that does serial harm, it has to do it supernaturally. So it has to somehow bring that misfortune, that death, that loss of money, whatever that harm takes the form of, in a supernatural way, or at least a way that's not traceable by natural means.
Let's start with a few of them. Let's start with the famous Annabelle the doll.
Yeah, Yeah. Annabelle the doll is, one of those borderline objects that could be cursed, could be haunted, might be both. Obviously, from the famous Warren collection in Connecticut, and generally it was always, it's a doll basically that was possessed by a spirit of a girl, and then did harm to whoever owned that doll. Eventually, got into hands. And that harm could include, scratches. One person who lived with the doll got, strangled by it, strangled by doll arms, and the way he described it was it felt like arms of iron. Eventually, the Warrens got involved. They grabbed that doll, took it home. They had problems with it themselves, where it would cause car trouble if they had it in the car. It would attack, or at least it would seem to get mad if there were, priests around or religious leaders. And there's even a rumor that it might have actually killed a person who just came to visit the museum. I think they died in a motorcycle accident on the way back. All from it's a Raggedy Ann doll. It's that famous Raggedy Ann IP that's been around for decades. Just happens to be this one is cursed.
How about the Unlucky Mummy?
Oh, that's a great one. So the Unlucky Mummy isn't even a mummy. The Unlucky Mummy is a mummy board. So it's like the top of the sarcophagus. It's shaped like a person, painted and shaped like a person. This one is actually, you can go see it today. It's in the British Museum. It was the cursed object that really inspired the King Tut myth as well. So it kind of set the template for what a cursed mummy artifact would be. But it's a typical story. Some Englishmen went over to Egypt, bought mummy parts, in this case the lid. I think also they tried to buy the body, brought it back. One man shot off his arm during a quail hunt. Another one lost his entire fortune twice. It was supposed to have hurt people that would just photograph it or carry it. So again, cursed objects seem to have like a victim list where they're picking out very particular people. Other times it seems anybody interested, from journalists to people that carry it, to people that own it, to people that just see it. And then the mummy board eventually ended up in the British Museum, where it is to this day.
How about JW, the Dybbuk box? What is that?
The Dybbuk box. So this is the idea behind this is that it's a cabinet in which a Dybbuk is, which a Dybbuk is kind of an evil spirit from.
Sold on eBay, wasn't it?
It was. So originally some guy had it, put it on eBay. It was bought. The guy that bought it kind of started having bad dreams and scary times. Then he sold it as well. So there's this big. The interesting thing about the Dybbuk box is there's this big kind of digital trail. Like you can see like the original eBay ads. You can kind of follow who bought it, all the way to Zach Bagans, who buys everything spooky, sticks it in his Las Vegas haunted museum attraction, where he puts it on. I went there. He puts it on display pretty well. It's got its own room. It's dark, well lit.
Yeah, he does a good job.
Salt around it, that kind of thing.
And that spawned a horror film, didn't it?
It did. And I can't remember the name of the horror film, but it did.
The Possession.
The Possession. Okay, that's why I forgot. It's one of 1,000 possession movies. Yeah, exactly. So, and the interesting thing is, there's no real record of Dybbuk boxes being a thing in Jewish lore. Dybbuks are a thing, and boxes are a thing, but this kind of like genie in a lamp idea was kind of spawned over here.
And how about the conjured chest?
Yes. From a chest of drawers. So the idea behind this one is that it was in one family for generations, and any time a family member put clothing in that chest of drawers, that person would either mostly die. Most of the time they died. Sometimes they got maimed. Sometimes other things happened to them, but mostly they died. And eventually that chest of drawers ended up in a museum in Kentucky. It was donated by one of the descendants who finally, I guess, got tired of everybody dying or learned about the curse. Because, again, it's just a very ordinary chest of drawers, and that's kind of what's insidious about cursed objects is if misfortune starts to befall you and your family, you're never going to suspect the chest of drawers. You're not going to expect your ottoman, your rocking chair, but any of those things could be cursed.
There's a Roman artifact called the Ring of Silvianus. What is that?
Yes, that's a good one. So the Ring of Silvianus is a gold ring dating to Roman times that was dug up in a field in Britain. They're always just digging stuff up accidentally. There's so much stuff under the soil in Britain. And some farmer found this ring, and it had Silvianus' name on it, and he kind of just, gave it or sold it to a local family who collected those things. And that really would have been the whole story, except that, a few miles away there is a site of an old Roman bath or a temple dedicated to a Roman god. And there was found what was called a Defixiones, which is a very thin metal tablet that contains a curse on it. And it just so happened the Defixiones they found had a curse against somebody named Silvianus for stealing a ring. So the idea is that This ring was stolen at that bath. It's just a place where people, put their valuables somewhere and take baths. Got stolen. Somebody put a curse on it immediately at the temple, and then whoever had this ring, probably there's a blessing inscribed on the ring, probably had that blessing inscribed to counteract the curse. So it's kind of interesting that we have these two separate artifacts that tell this really, really interesting story. And the cherry on top of the story is that at some point an archaeologist was studying that temple and wanted a kind of an expert in that field to come kind of talk about the Roman history there. So they called up Oxbridge, right? That's where you get experts from in Britain. And the guy he got to come out there and look at this ring in this area was a man named John Rider Rule Tolkien. So J.R.R. Tolkien goes out, learns about this cursed ring, and then a year or two later comes out with The Hobbit, which is all centered around a cursed ring. So that's kind of this real-life cursed object from real-life history gave us one of our epic stories of English literature.
Most of the objects, are they cursed by some individual or some event? What curses them?
It's really unknown. So the reasons why I think can be cursed, arranged, just like you said, somebody can actually curse it either through some kind of special abilities or just evil intent that can happen. Or another idea is that, a regular object, if it's by tragedy or by enough tragedy or by a big enough tragedy, it can kind of absorb that tragedy like dark energy and like be a little battery of negativity. Third idea is just some things are just born bad, kind of like Shirley Jackson's Hill House. From the point it was manufactured, it was just always going to cause harm. And you never really know. Like most of the cursed objects in the book that I've studied, they don't really have an origin point. You can't trace why they're cursed. They just suddenly start having a victims list.
Did you ever look at Robert the Haunted Doll down in Florida?
Yeah, in the Keys. He's a great one. So he was, he's kind of, I would call him a nice cursed doll because he doesn't do any harm, really. He was owned by a child. He's a giant doll. The origin story of that is it was probably specially manufactured for him or for a storefront I think in Germany, somewhere like that, a German toy maker. But eventually he went to this kid in the Keys who, gave it his own name. His name is Robert. He gave the doll his name Robert, gave him his own clothes because it was a large doll, and then kind of lived there his entire life, even until, he was old and gray and dying. And then the next people that owned the house somehow got this doll as well, and they got kind of...
They found it in the attic or something?
Yeah, exactly. And they would hear child footsteps when there's no children. They would move around different places. So they eventually donated it to a local museum where you can see it today. It's in a glass case in a Ford museum. And the idea is if you're ever rude to this doll, if you take its picture without asking, if you make fun of it, if you say, if you ignore it while you're in the room...
It'll get you.
It'll get you. So you'll go home. So they have entire files full of, apology letters from people who did something disrespectful, went home, broke a leg, lost money, had a death in the family. So they immediately wrote an apology letter back to Robert, and now, the museum has all these kind of in a file and on display. So it's kind of a really interesting story.
Was the movie Chucky, that haunted doll, based on Robert?
That is the rumor, yeah, because Robert's been around for a very long time, and obviously Chucky came out in the 1980s. So that is kind of one of the rumors floating around that I don't think the creators ever substantiated, but why not?
What is it about the haunted dolls that are so scary, JW?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the faces.
They're creepy.
They're miniature people, or the idea that they're supposed to be made for children. Like children are supposed to love dolls, and then they grow out of them, and they still have the dolls. It's something about children in general by themselves are freaky. So cloth and dead-eyed versions of them in dolls just, it's scary by themselves. Even not cursed dolls are scary, right? If you walk into a house and it's full of just toys, dolls, you kind of don't like it.
What gets the object decursed? Does that ever happen?
Oh yeah, totally. So there's people who collect cursed objects, and the way they typically describe how they would take away the negative energy, it's a variety of methods, right? It's salt, it's sunlight, it's some people use religious blessings on top of them, and some people just say you got to treat the objects nice. So you should be nice to it, don't be mean to them, and they won't be mean back. So those are typically the idea. Every once in a while, there's an object that just you can't shake its negative energy. So the best thing you do in that case is throw it in an ocean.
Have you ever been creeped out by an object yourself?
Yeah, totally. Like you said, any doll will creep me out. And then body parts. On display.
Keep away from displayed body parts, right?
Yeah, like Otzi the Iceman, which is, Bronze Age, natural, mummified person that was found in the Alps on the Italian border. It's a shriveled, leathery-looking person, and like it's on display, has its own museum.
And he was killed, wasn't he?
Yes, exactly. He was killed. Probably they found injuries on him and like a sword, like a axe wound in the back or something like that. So he was killed.
Some arrow or something like that.
Yeah, sort of an arrow. And then he had all of his stuff with him, like all of his like shoes and bags and his own weapons were all preserved. So because it was in the snow for hundreds, thousands of years. And now it's a literally dead body on display. So that's always a little bit freaky when it's a dead human being or human body part.
Would he have been in a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum? Probably, I would guess.
Oh, totally. If he hadn't been found where he was found, he would have definitely been in there. Because if you go into them today, there's one in Wisconsin that shows off the severed head of a serial killer. So like it's right there, and, like with the giant Lego sculptures and stuff.
And P.T. Barnum, he would have had him too, wouldn't he? At his circus,
definitely, and made up 1,000 stories about him for sure.
Yep, and would have had a huge crowd.
Yep, and I would have been part of that for sure. Because even though they creep me out, I'm still drawn to them every single time.
What is it about these objects that make people like yourself so interested and fascinated by them?
I think it's two things. One is that they are objects. So obviously anything can be cursed, a person, a place. But the fact that it's an object, that you can hold it in your hand, that's a physical thing, is to me kind of the most fascinating thing about them, right? So the Hope Diamond, which you can go see at the Natural History Museum in D.C., this thing has been around in human history for hundreds of years, starting in the mines of India all the way through French royalty, English royalty, the Cartiers to the Walshes in D.C. So all these people held this object. Their fingerprints, if it wasn't cleaned, are on this object. So knowing that this thing lived through history, I think, is fascinating. And the other side of that is it has a real history. So it's not just somebody on eBay made something spooky and just pretends it's cursed. This thing has an actual history that we have documented for, again, in the case of Hope Diamond, hundreds of years.
J.W., it's amazing. What fascinates you the most about what you do?
There's always something I don't know. Like the world always has something bizarre and shocking, and I would never, ever, known it, believed it was possible. But the world has surprises every single day for me.
Do you enjoy the traveling?
Oh, I totally do. I'm a big fan of road trips, especially just jumping in a car and driving to, stop after stop after stop of oddity and weird thing.
Do you go to haunted places?
Oh, totally, always. Those are big draws for me as well.
When you plot out your trip, what do you start with? How do you start?
So over the years, I've made my own map. So I have like thousands and thousands of pins on this map, some of which are black if I haven't seen it, or orange if I have seen it. And so I'm looking for anything that stands out, right? It could be an oddity of nature. It could be like a giant boulder in the middle of nowhere, oddity of art, oddity of history, oddity of science even. There's some great oddities of science. So anything that sticks out from like the regular static of everyday life. Like the way I think about it is if I go on a weekend trip, I come back and I'm talking to people on Monday, I want to have a weird story that they've never heard of, right? And then I can just say, oh, and this thing is only 2 hours away. Like you've lived 2 hours away from this your entire life. It's right there and it's weird. It's the kind of stuff I like to do.
How do people listen to your podcast, Odd Things I've Seen?
Yeah, they like to hear these stories directly from my mouth for some reason. I was just doing articles for years and years and books for years, but people seem to like hearing me recount it firsthand for some reason, even though I talk fast and slur my words. J.W.,
tell us about the Midwest story of the Dogman.
Oh, the Dogman's a great one. So the Dogman is part of the werewolf lore, right? So various places in the United States have canine humans, but for some reason the Dogman is really connected to Michigan, both through stories, but also through culture. There's a song from 1987 that a local radio DJ invented, and it became like a hit over there in Michigan, and it played every Halloween. Really tells the story of the Dogman. There was a hoax video that came out like a decade later that became big in the culture as well. So it's generally, anytime people see scratches in their cabin or in their house that are far higher up than a dog could reach, they blame the Dogman.
You've got about 270 creatures in this book, don't you?
Yeah, it depends on how you count them. I think if you dedicate only full articles and whatever, it's more than 70. But a lot more get mentioned in passing and a lot more in sidebars and stuff.
Who came up with these strange names for these creatures?
So some I have no idea. Some just come from history, like the names like Snallygaster, that's in Maryland, the Snarly Yow. They're great names like that. Bat Squatch. Most of the time, though, the person who names it is the first journalist to write about it, right? So the Mothman, they came from a journalist who wrote about it in the paper. Bat Squatch as well came out of a journalist. So usually the journalist who writes it, and then the person who gives it its kind of final form or most well-known form is either a artist for the newspaper, or sometimes the eyewitness will draw it themselves. They have some artistic ability and they'll draw it. So that's kind of how we get the kind of generalized forms and names.
When you go out on these trips, are you by yourself or do you bring people with you?
I bring people with me. Sometimes my family. I have a wife and 3 daughters. Sometimes they're coming with me. Sometimes it's a friend I know in the area of where I'm going. It's a good time to just meet up and hang out and go cryptid watching. So I'm always trying to find somebody to go with me. But sometimes I can't find anybody to go with me, so I just go by myself.
What do the daughters think of Dad's hobby?
They love it, and it's kind of perfect for families because, for instance, we'll go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to see the Mothman. We'll go to the TNT area, into those giant concrete bunkers and in the forest, and it feels really fun. And then we go to the gift shop, and they get like a stuffed Mothman toy. Or same with Champ up in Burlington, Vermont. We'll go out on the water. We'll come back to the museum, grab a toy. So they end up getting a lot of cool toys out of it.
How old are you?
I am 45.
You might be too young to remember the Aurora plastic models of monsters.
I do know of them, yes. I'm a big monster fan, so I definitely know the history of like classic monsters and those toys.
They're worth a small fortune now. I wish I still had them. I gave them all away.
I can't imagine the skill that kids have to like paint and glue and make it look nice and something you want to put on your shelf.
They had them all. They had Wolf, the creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, Dracula, the werewolf.
Yeah.
They were beautiful.
You just buy the toys themselves. There's 1,000 versions of those just on pegs on the stores.
Absolutely. Now, does anybody talk about things like Frankenstein?
In general, as far as seeing him?
Yeah. It's like a creature that looks like him?
In general, no. Although I will say, so the Flatwoods Monster, which does not look like Frankenstein, it's a 10-foot-tall metallic creature with glowing eyes and a skirt, was described by the adult witness that saw it as Frankenstein with body odor because it also smelled really bad. That was her phrase for it. But not really. I've never heard of somebody seeing, kind of a giant resurrected type creature like that. But that would be cool, though.
JW, thanks for being on the program.
No, I appreciate you having me on again. I really enjoyed it.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.